Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I move that this House condemns the McGowan-Labor Government and its Minister for Energy for 5.5 years of ongoing mismanagement of our state's energy network that is leaving households and businesses vulnerable to blackouts. And I know I am the lead speaker on this debate. Just before I start on the substance of the debate, I did want to reflect a little bit. Yesterday the Minister said in this place, and he made it clear, he alerted to the fact that he's going to go through the history of the prior policy of the Liberal Party at the last state election, that he's going to go through all of that and he's going to quote things. We've got a minister that's obsessed with the past, but not a minister who's managing the future. It's fine to sit here and drag things up, and my Lord, didn't we hear it today? I think we heard members opposite going back to the court government years, sort of as if that has some relevance to matters today or to the opposition alliance today. But as I say, a minister who's obsessed with the past and not focused on his job now. Now, I'll say it in this chamber. I've said it publicly. I said it after the state election. The minister likes to make a lot of the fact that the policy that the opposition or the Liberal Party had going into that election campaign, the last election campaign, was that there should be an early closure of the coal-fired power stations. Now, I was the Shadow Minister, a fairly recent Shadow Minister, can I say. I'm not part of that decision, but as the Shadow Minister, it's my obligation, as is proper as a member of Shadow Cabinet, that I publicly support that policy. But I made very clear after that election that I did not support that part of the policy personally, and I've made that clear subsequently, because the forced closure, I'm not seeking interjections from you, Minister.
The
forced closure.
Concentrate on Leader of the House.
Yeah. Oh, for goodness sake.
Minister.
Point of order. Madam Acting Speaker, I think the member for Cottesloe made it very clear he wasn't seeking interjections from the acting Leader of the House.
Minister, you will have your opportunity. Member for Cottesloe, continue.
Thank you very much. And look, I am certain, Minister, yourself at times have been compelled to support some parts of policy that you might not agree with, and I don't see you out there publicly doing that, because that would be the improper thing to do.
Member for Cottesloe, if you don't want to have interjections, can you please refrain from... Minister, please.
What I've made very...
Cottesloe, please don't taunt. Thank you.
I didn't think I was. I thought I was making a general point, Acting Speaker, but I'm happy to I am happy to follow your guidance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. But what I have made very clear all along is that the transition to renewables in Western Australia is not just inevitable, but that transition is important in the state of Western Australia, and there's probably no other place in the world that is better placed to go through that transition. Now, and the Minister doubled down on this. We saw the Minister, this is after the election, so this is after the elections occurred, after we'd had a resounding loss in the election, which, we would have preferred that hadn't happened. After that, the Minister then directs Treasury to go and do a costing of our policy that quite clearly can never be implemented because we lost the election. The government had resoundingly won the election. And yet the Minister's wasting Treasury's time, so he can score a point in this place. Imagine that. What a waste of time. Now, can I say this is the same Treasury that has been responsible for an enormous debacle in the sale of the Landgate properties in Midland. It is certain that sale has robbed the public of Western Australia many tens of millions of dollars. If Treasury wasn't wasting its time on a point-scoring exercise for the Minister in this chamber, if Treasury was actually focused on doing their job, which is ensuring the protection of the public purse, then perhaps we wouldn't have seen that Landgate deal. Now, even further, the Minister went even further than that. The Minister came into this chamber and he tabled private correspondence between myself and a head of one of his agencies, private correspondence. It was not copied to a single other person, and it was sent to me during the caretaker period, and yet the Minister somehow had that correspondence and comes and tables it in this chamber. What a disgrace. What a disgrace. And then furthermore, he doubles down even further and actually misrepresents actually misrepresents what I had said in that campaign, which is first, I think there's too much good material to go on with in the general area of energy. But I will go a little further and see in the larger part the government's actually adopted our policy. In the larger part, they've actually adopted our policy, the hydrogen highway, the electric highway, things that were poo-pooed. And I see now, and the Minister made a lot about the 330 kV line from Three Springs to Oakajee, which we said was critical if we were going to have development there, but also in terms of energy for the state. And now we see suddenly the government is hopeful that they're going to get some investment, and we see the Minister for Hydrogen come out with an announcement that now the government is actually doing an evaluation. They've allocated some millions of dollars to do an investigation of the feasibility of installing that 330 kV line, which they said was rubbish and was going to cost some ludicrous number of billions of dollars, and there'd have to be 3 of them, not 1, and all of that. So despite poo-pooing it all, the fact is that it seems that the Labor Party is actually a keen advocate of pretty well every aspect of the policy that we implemented. Now, this condemnation of the McGowan-Labor Government, its Minister for Energy, is warranted on the basis of the following 7 points, and they've all occurred under this government's tenure and in this minister, who's been the Minister for Energy for the larger part of this first and second term of this government. And the first is failing to make any notable progress to reverse the declining reliability of electricity supply, especially in rural and metropolitan semi-rural areas. Failing to respond in a tangible manner to the Christmas outages review recommendations for improving grid reliability in rural areas. Failing to resolve the problems around timely repair of electricity outages due to bushfire rules enacted by DFES. Failing to ensure the timely resolution of the Goldfields power outages and which are maintained by the use of backup power generators. Failing to publicly release the government's plan for the future of our energy system without the insurance of our coal-powered generators being available. Failing to ensure Premier Coal maintains coal supply for our coal-fired power plants, and denying rural communities the benefit of modern life by sudden imposition earlier this year of rules demanding switch limiters be installed if buildings have solar panels attached. Now, we did hear today that the Minister has suddenly discovered that in fact that is possible, and it's good to see eventually. Thanks very much to my colleague sitting beside me. That is an important matter to resolve, but nevertheless a big impact on people who live in rural communities who suddenly couldn't install solar panels, and many solar operators were looking at bankruptcy because of the implementation of that, or the application, should I say, not the implementation, but the application of that policy when solar panels were being installed. Now, I'm going to go through these aspects. I won't obviously be able to go through them in detail, it's overwhelming, but I will go through them one by one. First and foremost, the Minister is condemned for failing to make any notable progress to reverse the declining reliability of electricity supply, especially in rural and metropolitan semi-rural areas. Now, I've raised this before, and I'm going to keep raising it in this place because we see no improvement in the situation, despite statements. We hear statements from the Minister that he is doing something to improve power supply, but in fact the data belies that fact. Now, the government, after 5.5 years in office, and the Minister is 4.5 years in the portfolio, there seems to be barely an acknowledgement that any problem exists, and certainly no evidence that anything, as I said, effective is being done about it. Now, last summer we had extensive blackouts. So we had the Christmas blackouts, we had the May blackouts, that affected large parts of not just the goldfields, that was perhaps the topical area, but in fact right across regional Western Australia. And this year we've seen, for example, we had an extensive blackout in Quairading a little earlier this year, and that took far too long to resolve, far longer than it should. Now, we sort of hear, the minister make various excuses. The minister is very keen to blame others for these things, and in this case, well, it's the load on the system, and the system is a very long way away from where the power generation occurs. But the commentary exposes the failure of the minister to understand that his job is to ensure that people do have power. Yes, there are challenges. We all understand that. It's not trivial. It is complex, and Western Australia is a vast state. But that is the job that the minister has to have. And as we'll see under this minister, power reliability has got substantially worse. Now, that experience in Christmas last year was worse than usual, but it's not an uncommon experience for too many people in WA. And I'll just reveal in a little while how many people are affected by power outages. I think members will be surprised to actually see the number of people that have to live with power outages in the state of Western Australia. Now, I think that what is clear in all of this, and it's clear in the statements the minister's made, is that especially for people who live in regional areas, it's the sort of, well, I'll paraphrase, this is not a term that the minister has used, I'll make clear, but if I had to paraphrase what the minister's saying, it's suck it up. Well, you live in the bush, get used to it. It doesn't really matter. We won't really worry because, yep, you're a long way away. There are all these other reasons. Now, I think it's this ignorance of, or at least ignoring the plight of the people that live in regional areas is indicative of this Labor Party. This Labor Party, I guess the ultimate disregard they have for regional Western Australia is what they've done to the electoral system, where they've effectively destroyed regional representation in the upper house in Western Australia. Now, that's your disregard. You don't care about regional people. All the votes are in Perth. That's all you care about. And it's pretty evident, can I say, pretty evident.
Ministers.
Yeah. It'll be a bit of a change next election, I reckon. Minister. I reckon your popularity ratings in the regional areas has gone from hero to zero. Hero to zero, I would say. Hero to zero. And look, we've got lots of evidence of a failing system, and I will go through it because it's important. Now, it's obviously the lived experience of lots of people in terms of those outages, but as I said, for people that live in regional communities, nearly all of them have backup power supply generation. Nearly all of them have to install it, and increasingly, even in regional towns now, people are saying, this is so unreliable, I'm just going to have to get my own generator. I cannot trust the supply of the government network. Now, I've been through the evidence before, but I'll go through it again. But I'll refer members...
Come over to the Darwin Scarp.
I'll refer members to the Economic Regulation Authority's annual data report for 2020-21 for energy distributors, which is the latest report that I obtained. And the ERA tells us that the number of customers affected by extended interruptions, meaning power outages of more than 12 hours, rose from some 45,000 in 2016-17, the last year of the former Liberal government, to 98,159 in 2019-20, and 69,995 in 2020-21. It's still being 55% higher than in previous years. Now, the ERA reported that for rural areas with a standard average outage duration of 290 minutes or nearly 5 hours, the result in 2020-21 was about 1,700 minutes of interruption, or over 28 hours. So that's nearly 6 times higher than the expected minimum standard. Now, just to be sure that we don't hear the excuse that has been trotted out in the past, that this was all to do with Cyclone Seroja, if we exclude the impact of Cyclone Seroja, we recorded a rural average of nearly 1,400 minutes, being 4 times higher than the maximum standard. So, yes, Cyclone Seroja had an impact, but if you exclude Cyclone Seroja, the outages are still 4 times higher than what is regarded as the accepted standard. Now, in 2021, we had 42,318 Perth customers experiencing 5 to 8 interruptions and 532,103 customers experiencing 1 to 4 interruptions. And that's a total of 575,744 Perth customers experiencing electricity outages in a single year. And that data came from a question on notice 559 in the LC. If we look at that, it's clearly not acceptable by any standard. It's not acceptable by Western Power's own standards. And I might say in terms of Perth, the number of outages, given the extent of the underground power system in Perth, you might say surprising, but it's not surprising when you start to look at the age and the age profile of the equipment in our power network. Now, the ERO reports that Western Power has not met the standard of average duration of outage for Perth of 160 minutes in the 6 years reported. Now, during 2021 in Perth, 370,220 customers had outages lasting less than 60 minutes. 301,089 had outages lasting between 60 minutes and the standard 160 minutes, and 238,967 customers experienced outages of more than the standard of 160 minutes. So we're not talking about a handful of customers, a handful of people in the network. I mean, that's a total of 910,276 occasions when electricity customers in Perth experienced power outages during 2021, almost a million power outages just in Perth in 2021. Now, experiencing that is not an acceptable standard, and again reflects a network that has a large number of issues. Now, the ERA reports that for rural areas, the acceptable standard for our system is 16 interruptions per year. So you can see the government accepts, and this is not new to this government, I will say, but the government accepts that there are that many interruptions per year per customer, and there were 632 customers experiencing more than 16 interruptions, and that was the best effort for 6 years. Now, during 2020 to 21, 11,603 customers experienced 10 to 15 interruptions, so the numbers just get massive. At a level that's still substantially higher than is accepted in metropolitan Perth. 270,376 customers with 1 to 10 power outages. Now that's a total of 282,602 rural customers, and that's probably half of all rural customers. In fact, it's probably more than that, experiencing electrical outages. So we can see why people in regional Western Australia feel that the power network is unreliable when they experience those many outages. Now, you can shrug your shoulders and say, well, it's a long line, and yes, it is, but you've got to be doing something about it and something to improve it. Now, through 2021 in rural areas, we had 327,703 customers experiencing up to 2 hours of power outages, 146,630 customers without power between 2 hours and the 290 minutes, that is the standard. And 86,908 customers without power for between 290 minutes and 10 hours. So that's a total of 561,241 occasions when rural customers experienced that power outage in a single year. Now, if you add them up, it's an overall total of nearly 1.5 million occasions of power outages. So we're not talking about the odd power outage here or there. And I might say, if you actually look at the website, what you see with these outages in a good many of cases, it's not 1 or 2 isolated houses, it's whole areas, whole sections, whole communities that are in power. Now that's a troubling state of affairs. Now that decline in the supply of electricity supply was confirmed by the Christmas outage review, and I'll just go through that review. But that review stated, this data data shows, so they were referring to the data of outages, this data shows over a 4-year period a materially worsening customer outage experience trend in CBD and rural areas with flat performance in urban areas. I'll repeat that. This is this government's time in office. This data shows over a 4-year period a materially worsening customer outage experience trend in CBD and rural areas with flat performance in urban areas. So that wasn't me saying it. This is the this is the review of those Christmas outages. Now, the report acknowledged the impact of Cyclone Seroja, but that does not account for the materially worsening trend over the 4 years. And, you know, the events such as fires and storms and the like occur. That's a regular occurrence. We know that that happens every year. It's happened every year. It will, and that will account for some of it. But the bottom line is that this situation is getting worse. And there's no comfort even in urban areas where the situation is flatlining. So we're not seeing an improvement in urban areas. We're only seeing a maintenance of the status quo. Now, what we don't see, and it's clear, we don't see that there's any notable effort by the government to stop this trend and put our system back in the right direction. Send us to a system that has better reliability with less outages and shorter outage duration time. Now, to the contrary, it's this government's mismanagement and failure to prioritise investment in the grid, especially in rural areas, that is causing the decline of reliability in our electricity supply. Now, in fact, the evidence of that is available in Western Power's own State of Infrastructure report from 2021, and I will go through that in a little bit of detail because I think there's important information in that report. Now, that report, it informs us about the ageing profile of the equipment, and for almost every item in the report, the amount of aged equipment under 5 years, that is the newest equipment, that's the equipment that this government is responsible for, has decreased in every year for the 3 years that the report covers. And it underscores the assertion that the Labor government has not been putting the priority on ensuring reliability through an improving network by investing in areas of need. And I mean, as I'll show you, the data speaks for itself. Now, it's not surprising that we have an increasing trend of power outages if we have an increasing age of the equipment in the network, if we're not bringing in new equipment at a fast enough rate for that network. Now, the report also tallies with the independent review of the Christmas outages, which noted that Western Power in the period 2017 to 2022 that had that Western Power did not spend $368 million of money that they had planned to spend, and they had approval to spend on capital. So this was improving the network, adding to the network, making the network a better place. And again, we've had this discussion in this place, and the Minister said, well, you know, they don't have to spend it. But the reality is that that Western Power has had almost $400 million available to them to do that, but they've clearly been underspending in this network, and that has resulted in a less reliable network. And what we should have been seeing was replacement of equipment in the key categories, improving the age of that network. Now, you know, so there's no financial constraint on Western Power because Western Power has been retaining its dividends as well, so they have plenty of cash. Now, look, I will go back and I will go through those graphs, but you know, I've printed them out, members, and I do have approval from the Speaker as well to show these to you. But I'll go through the equipment and I will describe some of it. So if we look at distribution poles, and I'll explain the graph to you, but this is the number of the quantity on this axis, and each of the three bars on the axis corresponds to the year 2018-19, 2019-20 and 2020-21, going from my left to right. So what we can see in the age profile of distribution poles in the 0 to 5 years is that under this government, they're all going down. If we look at the 6 to 10, they're all going up. So what we're seeing is more poles in the 6 to 10 age fewer poles in the 0 to 5 age. And can I say, in pretty well every other category, no change in the number of poles in that age profile. But of course, what that means is no improvement. So it doesn't mean in some of those older categories that they're getting worse, but what they're not doing is improving. So it's not there's not an improvement and a replacement of those older. If that was the case, if the government was actually replacing those older poles, and the two things do correlate, then if we had the 36 to 40 year, for example, we'd see that going down. But we don't. And have a look, members. In none of those categories is there any trend down. In fact, if anything, there's a slight trend up. If we have a look at transmission structures, we see essentially exactly the same trend. And, worryingly, we look at 41 plus, we see a slight increase, no improvement in that in the very old structures that are in the network. And I can go through these. The transmission overhead conductors. In fact, in the 0 to 5 category, we see a near collapse, which indicates that substantially underspend or no spend almost in that category, but in the 6 to 10 it's going up. And as I say, in those higher age categories, in fact in this case it's only the 31 to 35 you see it going down, but in all the other categories you see the numbers going up. So again, entirely consistent with an ageing profile. If we look at the distribution transformers, transformers are critical, we see exactly the same trend. We see the 0 to 5 going down, the 6 to 10 is essentially static. In every other category it's staying the same. So we're not seeing the net replacement of those older transformers, the 36-year plus transformers in the network. When we go through ring main units, we see exactly the same trend. If we look at pole top switch disconnectors, again, critical in the power work, exactly the same trend. And the very aged ones, and is by far and above the largest number, we see an increasing trend of the very aged in that. Reclosers, it's the same information. Sectionalisers, and some of this is obviously might bore you, but if we look at dropout fuses, critically important. Fuses age, they degrade over time, and in fact older fuses will tend to fail below the current that they're designed to fail because they're older fuses. What do we see in dropout fuses? 0 to 5 getting less, 6 to 10 is static, and in every other category essentially static, and in the 36 plus, and that's very old and well beyond the age that most fuses should be there, we see a slight increase and then no change. Power transformers, in that case also in the 0 to 5 a very marginal increase, but in the older categories essentially no change, and so on. So we go through that list: switchboard, circuit breakers and the like. So what we see in that...
Are you tabling those reports?
Oh, I'm happy to. It's a publicly available report which I referred to.
No problem. No, it's done corrected.
Thank you very much. So, when we go through all of those items, what do we see consistently? We see consistently that a network that is getting older, and we don't see any improvement in the age of that network. No wonder we see problems. No wonder when we have a hot day, we see problems in that network, and we see all of that dropping out. Now, and of course what those graphs don't tell, the devil's always in the detail in terms of those graphs, but what they don't tell us obviously is where that money is being spent. But I don't think you'd have to be a rocket scientist to imagine that the greater majority of that money that's going to be spent in metropolitan Perth and not the regional areas. So, those graphs tell the truth. As I say, we can hear the Minister say they're doing this and they're improving the network and the like. But in fact, the data that's available, the evidence that's available to us and to the government is that is not the case at all. Now, if we go on to the second point, which is the failing to respond in a tangible manner or in a tangible manner to the Christmas outages review recommendations for improving grid reliability in rural areas. Now, following that outage, the Minister did at least arrange for an independent review to be carried out. And that review made some excellent recommendations, and I think members have, some of you at least will have seen that review, but that went through and it made a number of recommendations to improve its approach to distribution network forecasting, review planning criteria to ensure it's fit for the future, to continue to improve its approach to reducing the risk of outages occurring and the length of outages, review of Western Power's fire risk response in light of the community impacts, prolonged outages, particularly during heat waves, and Western Power to engage with the community to improve customer and stakeholder communication in line with customer expectations, especially during extreme events, and increased transparency regarding reliability in communities. Now, it is, and I hope the Minister can use it part of the opportunity in his response, other than giving me a lesson on history, and that is to say, where are all of those recommendations at? I mean, they were good recommendations, it was a good review, and as I said, the Minister did the proper thing in ordering that review to what was a horrendous situation for many people in regional Western Australia, particularly in the goldfields. But what has happened with those recommendations? Because I have not actually heard anything from this Minister in any detail for some considerable time on where we're at. Now, recommendation 6 is probably the most important, and that was about for communities experiencing poor service. It includes identifying the causes of reliability problems and the plans to address those in the future. Now, that's obviously absolutely paramount. There's not much point doing a review if you're not going to the root cause of the problems and you're not coming up with a plan to solve those problems in the future. And we've seen that the age of the equipment is not improving. So what's happening? Where's the plan? One thing the Minister could use his reply for today is to tell us what that plan is, maybe table that plan, maybe get his officers, which I'm sure he can communicate with, and bring it in. Now, and if we look at some of the response to the problems that the communities are having to get their own backup generators. Now, there was a letter to the West Australian, and I did read out to the. I have read it out in this place before, but it was in response to the Premier's comment that reliability in rural areas was acceptable. So despite all of that, the Premier, I think probably parroted words from the Minister for Energy, but this letter to the West was, I think the response was quite good. It said, Premier Mark McGowan should come and live in Port Dennis and Dongra if he thinks Western Power's reliability is acceptable. The real sufferers are those who cannot afford generators, which probably about half of the community has because the power supply is so unreliable. And that was a letter to the editor in the West Australian on the 2nd of June 2022 by Mr Jim Waddell of Port Dennis. And that goes to the core of it. It's easy to sit in metropolitan Perth and say, shucks, folks in the country should just put up with this poor reliability. But of course, for those people, not so funny. I don't think it would be funny in your house if you were out without power for 4 or 5 days. I don't think anyone in this place would think that is acceptable. And yet the Premier is saying, no, things are fine. This is a system that this government has under control. And I think, times have changed. I mean, when I was a little kid, we had kerosene fridges and telly lamps. Now, that was probably unusual at the time. Not completely unknown, but unusual. But then we put in our own generator, and we had a small diesel generator, because what we didn't have in our house were a plethora of electrical appliances. Our communication didn't rely on mobile phone coverage, which for many people now is their only means of communication, which is especially important. We didn't rely on the internet communication, and of course many regional communities, when the power goes out, not only do they lose the electricity to their house, to their fridge, they actually, because the phone towers don't have backup for more than a couple of hours typically, they lose all of their communication. They lose all of their internet communication, because much of the internet communication goes through towers. It doesn't go through fixed cable from house to house. So, people in the regional communities, like people in metropolitan Perth, reliable power supply is crucial for the way they live. It's crucial for small businesses. When the power goes out, businesses can't conduct transactions. Very few people deal in cash these days. So power supply, you can't just say, oh, well, shucks, they're in the bush, it should be less reliable. It is a critical, and particularly I might say in the large regional towns. So where is the plan, Minister? That was one of the recommendations you were to respond to. Where is that detailed analysis and the plan to say how we're going to do better, how this network is going to be improved? Now I turn to the, failing to resolve the problems around the timely repair of electricity outages due to bushfire rules enacted by Western Power in response to DFES declarations of total fire bans and vehicle movements. Now, what we've seen in Western Australia, and I'll say at the outset, it's proper that Western Power should consider the issues of bushfire risk and the like. That's obviously entirely appropriate. But Western Australia has been an absolute outlier in the types of conditions that the DFES, that the Western Power workers are allowed to come back in and work into the network. And we see enormous delays even when, in fact, the fire risk is minimal in the area that's affected, even when there are adequate safeguards that can be put in place. Now, that problem's has clearly been exacerbated by internal rules that have been put in. Now, I did hear the Minister say that was going to be reviewed and it was going to be looked at, but what we haven't seen is the outcome of that. So what is the outcome of that examination? Now, the Western Power does have the there are some caveats in the rules that are there, but what we've seen are these enormous delays due to that, and to the exasperation of communities where communities are happy and in fact adequate fire services are there and available, can be provided. The risk is clearly minimal to extremely low, no more than an ordinary condition, and yet Western Power is not doing that. Now, as I say, I expect that Western Power does things in a prudent way, but what's clear is that the rules have been applied in such an extreme way that causes extreme delays in the repair of networks. And as I said, I did hear the Minister say at some stage that there was going to be a response to that, and I would like to actually see that. Has there actually been a material change? Are we going to see, in appropriate circumstances, that work is going to be carried out, and we're not going to see the extreme delays in times where it clearly makes no sense at all in terms of fire risk. Now, in relation to the fourth point, and that is failing to ensure Goldfield Power is maintained in a timely manner by the use of backup power generators. Now, that has changed. I'll give the Minister credit. That has changed. The tragedy is that it took so long for that to change. And I will go through this in a little bit of detail because it is fascinating to hear what's been said in this place, and then when you actually talk to the people responsible for operating the equipment, what they say. Now, and the Minister makes much of the fact that, yes, in relation to the Christmas outages, there were other issues, but one of the material problems was the time it took to provide backup power, and not just at that outage, but in the May outage, and also more generally. And it took some considerable time, can I say, to actually dig into that, and then for the Minister to make a change. Now, there have been lengthy outages in that Goldfields region, and can you imagine the sense of despair that people in that region have when they know that in fact there are two first-class backup power stations in the region, two of them, one owned by Synergy, which has a contract to provide backup power, but also the Parkeston Power Station, which is a privately owned power station, which can also provide power into the network very rapidly. Now, when I raised this issue, and when we raised the issue of those outages, I was told that the backup generator was not started up immediately because decisions and starting it are made by bureaucrats in Perth, guessing how long they can quickly fix the outage. Well, I should say, when I was first told, I was told it was impossible to start it up quickly. It couldn't be done in less than 2-3 hours, and I will go through that a little bit. But, you know, what is... you know, interesting that this decision will be made. Just imagine you've got someone sitting in Perth in their air-conditioned house with their lights on, they're not losing all the goods out of their freezer, and they're going, oh, do you reckon it's going to get fixed in 2 hours or not? Oh, I reckon it'll get fixed in 2 hours. And then when it takes 3-4 hours, it still doesn't get started up, and you end up with these enormously lengthy outages in regional Western Australia now. And that was the situation in the thing. And I'll just go back, you know, to some of the information you get told in estimates. The minister was sitting there in estimates. We had the Estimates Committee on Thursday, the 26th of May 2022, when Mr Barber, in fact the Minister, was asked about how long it took to start those generators up. We're told that it's 2 to 3 hours. So we're told that generators have to ramp up, and as they ramp up they put on some load, and that it will take 2 to 3 hours. And you know, time doesn't permit me to go through Mr Barbaro's response in detail, but this was what we was told, and the Minister says, yes, that's it. Well, you know, it took a 5-minute conversation with the engineers responsible for running that power station to learn that that's completely untrue. Now, if I could have that conversation now, I thank the Minister for letting me talk to Synergy. Obviously the Minister allowed me to visit Synergy, and so I thank him for that. But when I talked to the engineers and said, how long does it take to start up those generators and start getting electricity in the network, they told me 15 minutes. Not 2 to 3 hours, 15 minutes. Now, the Minister comes into this place quite often and he says, look, you know, there's a separation between what a Minister does and when you have an agency, they manage their own affairs, and as a Minister I don't interfere in their day-to-day operations. But the job of a Minister is to ask the key questions. The job of a Minister is to challenge those agencies, not just to accept what they change. And if the Minister sees fit, as he has done on, well, I think he's done on at least one occasion, and that is the Minister can actually direct them what to do in writing. He can say, you have to do this. So a Minister has enormous power, but it's ultimately the Minister. That's our whole system of government. Ultimately the Minister's accountable, whether it's a government trading enterprise or not. Its failures ultimately are the Minister's failures. Now, you know, we on this side are apparently accountable for what government did, for what our parties did 30 years ago. Well, I can tell you what, if that's the case, this Minister's responsible for what the trading enterprises are doing today.
WAE.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we'll bring that back. So, you know, the Minister appropriately says he's not in there every day to day. You know, he's not turning the switches. He's not fixing the generators and the like. But the Minister could have asked exactly the same question I did. It was an obvious question to ask. Is that really true? That's the job of the Minister. And in fact, what the engineers actually told me is you can actually start putting load on in less than 15 minutes. Once you started up, there are 2 generators there for Synergy. One controls frequency, which is critically important on the network, and then the other generator is synced to that. But once you start up the first generator, which controls frequency, you can actually put load on as it's firing up. So it's actually less than 15 minutes to start bringing load on, not 2 to 3 hours, which was persistent. Now, I understand a direction has been given now to Western Power to do that and to make sure they started. And can I say, despite some significant severe storms coming through Kalgoorlie since then, what we've seen is that town has not been without power for extended outages. So that's pleasing to see that change, but that only came about because of challenges from this side of the House and took way too long for that issue to be resolved. Now, the 5th point on the list of the failures of this Minister concern the Minister's energy plan. Now, the Minister has said that he has an energy plan, but I say that this Minister has failed to publicly release the government's plan for the future of our energy system without the insurance of our coal-powered generators being available. And that's an issue of extreme concern for the future. The Minister's approach is largely trust me. Now, the Minister recently has announced the firm plan for the closure of the coal-fired power plants as part of the future. Now, we've asked the Minister to release that plan, and the Minister has in fact said no. And if we go to question time in this place, and where I asked the Minister, I refer to the Minister's comments on 6PR where he stated he had a detailed plan, and this is in relation to the shutdown of the coal-fired power stations, and detailed financial analysis that supports his decision to close the Collie and Muja power stations completely by 2029. Will the Minister table the detailed plan and the financial analysis so that everyone can see what he's proposing, and if not, why not? Now, you know, again, then we see the Minister hiding, oh, well, it's Synergy's plan, it's not actually my plan, so I can't do it, so we'll hide behind the agency. And then the Minister starts to talk about other generic plans. Go and have a look on the web. I'd encourage you, members, there's lots of stuff there. It sounds fantastic. There's a transition plan, there's all these plans, but what they don't have is any detail in them. There's no detail in those plans. They don't have the detail that you require, and our community deserves to know those plans. I think it's the responsibility. This idea of trust me, don't worry, I'll get it all right, is not. Yeah, we'll get well. Will we see the plan? Will we see the plan by 2025, which is an interesting election year, member for Collie, and certainly one we'll be making some moment of. So, but you know, we need that plan now. I might say there's some good work here, and what I can encourage the Minister to do. I know the Minister's well read, and he likes to study things. Minister, study the Queensland plan, because the Queensland government, your political allies, if you like, in Queensland, they've published the Queensland Supergrid Infrastructure Blueprint. That's what they've published. They're open and transparent with the people of Queensland in the detail of their plan. They've got the same problem as us, in fact more so. They rely more heavily on coal-fired power generation than we do, and they've published the detail of the plan. So we've got a Minister, he tells us he's on top of his game, that he's doing all of this work, he's got all of these task force doing all of this work. Well, here's Queensland, who's got a bigger problem than us in relation to transitioning from coal, and they've got the detail. They've got the detail of how they're going to beef up their grid. They've got the detail of how they're going to transition to renewables. They've put in a form that the people of Queensland can understand. They've got it's about a 20-page summary which goes through it, and then they've got the detailed plan. So, Minister, where's your detailed plan? Don't point to me to some vague sort of spin doctor's document on the web that sort of talks in generalities and saying, yep, we're going to do it. Where's the plan? Queensland have got a detailed plan. They've got their costings. They've got everything in it for the people of Queensland. But the people of Western Australia are left completely in the dark. And I say, no pun intended, but completely in the dark on what the Minister plans. What the Minister says, well, we're looking into it. Well, I've got AEMO on the job. I've got all of these task force going. Queensland, a far more difficult situation than us, and they have that plan. So, Minister, where's your plan? You are not being open and transparent with the people of Western Australia in terms of what's going forward, and you expect people to just trust you. Now, the sixth point in the obvious failure of the Minister relates to that coal supply problem in Collie. And the Minister has answered some questions in this place, and what do we hear? We hear the same old thing. Well, it's commercial in confidence. Well, it's a government agency. I don't manage them. Well, they've got a contract with Premier Coal. The buck stops at the top. I mean, just imagine, I cannot imagine on the other side that in relation to problems within an agency that members opposite ever accepted ministers of that time of a Liberal National Government saying, well, shucks, nothing I can do because, you know, I can't see anything, I don't know what's going on. Absolutely not. The Minister can demand any information from Synergy, any information. The Minister can give written direction to Synergy. At any time. The Minister, if the Minister is not being informed of a problem that is looming, then the Minister needs to look at the people that are reporting to him because that is unacceptable. But in this case, I find it incomprehensible that the Minister did not know that there was a looming problem, that suddenly, out of the blue, a few weeks ago, this problem raised its head. I think that the Minister must have known that there was a problem looming, and the Minister cannot hide behind this view that, well, it's Synergy, well, they're a corporation, you know, a government-owned corporation, trading enterprise, I can't do anything. The Minister could have done something. Now, you know, and imagine the ludicrous situation. I'm dumbfounded. Member for Collie, I'll be fascinated how you justify this to the people of Collie and your union colleagues. If we ever see a bag of coal coming from Newcastle to Collie, I think that would be the greatest day of shame for the Labor Party in Western Australia, pretty well. Just imagine, apart from the fact that they're actually very poor unloading capacity for coal at Bunbury or at Fremantle, and there's no capacity. But just imagine that. Just imagine seeing, you know, truckloads or container loads or goodness knows what form it would come in of Newcastle coal coming into Collie, because this Minister has let us reach a situation where coal supplies are not being provided. Now, you know, the Minister hides behind and says, well, I can't interfere in this and I can't do that. That's rubbish. That is not true. This Minister can give written direction to those agencies at any time, and he can give written direction to them to do a whole range of tasks. There is a contract with Premier Coal for the provision of coal, and the Minister can look into that. Now, I note around this table, I see commercial enterprise, I see companies entering into arrangements or starting various enterprises, and I see ministers happily sitting beside them taking all the credit, you know, for the stuff they've done. You know, you see a mine open, you see someone announce a hydrogen project at Kwinana. We've got the Minister there lining up, and then they've got their support crew behind that they want to get in the photo as well. So we see them lining up to take credit and saying that they've been responsible for that. But then when we have a problem, we go, oh no. The
previous government.
No, I can't. Yeah, that's right. It was Richard Court's fault. But we say, oh no, you know, we can't do anything about this because, oh, this is a commercial business arrangement. So you're happy to claim the glory when business does something, but all of a sudden when there's a problem with an industry or with a business, all of a sudden can't do anything. Now the reality is, and I know the Minister does this, I know the Minister and other ministers sit down with businesses. I know when there are issues they sit down and they'll talk it through and so on. So to say suddenly in relation to this it's all hands off, there's nothing we can do, is not true. Now the Minister might not be able to direct business, and I clearly wouldn't expect him to do that, but he can certainly have those discussions, he can certainly know what the issues are, and he can certainly direct those agencies that are under his ministerial control. So you know, I hope it's wrong. I hope we don't see a single piece of coal coming through, and I will push on, member, because I've just got the last one to cover in this. And just in relation to that seventh deadly sin, we might say, it does relate to the people in rural communities, and that is this expectation that rural communities should accept second best standard. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's harder. But we've already seen this government make decisions. We've seen with some of the MetroNet projects, the rate of return on the project is 30%. That's what we've seen from this government. The rate of return on this project, on particular projects, is as low as 30%. The government doesn't always need to have a business case. We heard from the Minister of Transport a reason for that, saying even if one student caught it was justified, which I found a little bit dumbfounding, but nevertheless, because I thought you could buy them a helicopter and give a new one every day for the price they're spending. But nevertheless, government does have to spend money from time to time on things, but people who live in rural communities should not expect second best standard. The reality is the Minister has seen a decline in the reliability of our electricity supply, more outages, older equipment, and what we don't see from the Minister, we hear lots of statements, we hear lots of lecturing to our side of this House, but we don't see the detail of the plans that he has in place to fix that system.
John?